Welcome back, everyone, to the deep dive. So today, we're going to be tackling something that you specifically wanted to explore,
Okay.
and it's the whole idea of isolation,
Mm.
but not just in the everyday sense.
Yeah.
You shared a message about isolation from a spiritual perspective,
Right.
specifically the reasons why God might choose to isolate individuals.
Okay.
And we're going to take a deep dive into that together and see what we can uncover.
Yeah. It definitely flips the script on how we usually think about isolation, doesn't it? This whole idea that maybe it's not just a negative experience, but a purposeful act with deeper meaning.
Yeah, it is a powerful concept.
Yeah.
The message that we're looking at lays out 7
Okay.
specific reasons for this kind of divine isolation, and it even uses the phrase, God hides those. He will reveal. What are your thoughts on that?
It's interesting how that one line reframes the entire experience. Suddenly, isolation becomes less about being forgotten and more about being prepared for something bigger, something you might not be ready for without going through that period of separation.
Yeah,
It's almost like a behind-the-scenes training montage for your life's purpose.
exactly. And it really hammers home the point that isolation is not a punishment.
Right.
It's more like a strategic move with a very specific goal in mind.
Right. And that goal seems to be centered around transformation and purpose.
Okay.
And we see similar concepts in other spiritual traditions as well.
Oh, really?
Think about the concept of a vision quest in Native American cultures,
Okay.
where individuals would isolate themselves in nature to seek guidance and connect with the spiritual realm,
Yeah.
or the practice of solitary retreats in various monastic traditions where the focus is on introspection prayer
Oh.
and deepening one's relationship with the divine.
So it's not just about being alone, it's about what you do with that aloneness, right? It becomes this period of intense inner work and development.
Exactly. It's about stripping away distractions and facing yourself, your fears, your weaknesses, in order to come out stronger on the other side.
Well, this message dives right into 7 specific reasons why this might happen.
Okay.
The first one is protection.
Okay.
The idea that God might isolate someone to shield them from negative influences and dangerous situations or even toxic relationships.
Right.
It even suggests that sometimes what we perceive as rejection or loss might actually be God's way of protecting us from something that we can't see.
That's a very powerful concept, especially for those who've experienced painful separations or setbacks.
Yeah,
It offers a sense of hope and meaning in those situations.
definitely. And they use the example of David fleeing from King Saul.
Right.
It's like he was forced into isolation, hiding in caves and deserts.
Mm-hmm.
But that very isolation became his training ground,
Yes.
preparing him for leadership and honing his skills as a warrior.
What's interesting is that it wasn't just physical skills he developed during that time.
Yeah.
It was also his character. Think about the qualities that isolation can foster: resilience, resourcefulness, self-reliance, the ability to make tough decisions under pressure.
Right.
These are all essential traits for a leader, especially one facing constant threats.
So it's not just about surviving the wilderness, it's about what the wilderness teaches you.
Yes.
It's like a crash course in leadership under the most extreme circumstances.
Right, and it highlights the idea that true leadership often emerges from facing adversity, not from comfort and privilege.
Right.
It's in those moments of isolation, when we're stripped bare and forced to rely on our inner resources, that we discover who we truly are and what we're capable of.
Okay, so reason number 1 is protection,
Okay.
which kind of sets the stage for reason number 2, preparation.
Got it.
The message argues that isolation can be a time of intense growth and learning,
Yeah.
where God is essentially equipping you for your purpose.
This ties in beautifully with the idea of divine timing.
Yeah.
Perhaps there are certain lessons we can only learn in solitude. Certain skills we can only develop when we're away from the distractions and influences of the world.
And they use Moses as a prime example here.
Okay.
He spent 40 years tending sheep in the desert before God called him to lead the Israelites out of Egypt.
Oh, wow.
It's like, imagine going from sheepherder to liberator.
Wow.
What kind of inner transformation do you think might have happened during those 40 years?
It's fascinating to consider what Moses might have wrestled with during that time.
Yeah.
We often think of him as this confident, powerful figure,
Right.
but imagine the self-doubt he must have faced.
Yeah.
Perhaps he questioned his abilities, his worthiness for such a monumental task.
Uh-huh.
Those 40 years could have been a period of grappling with those doubts, of learning to trust in God's guidance, and ultimately of developing the unwavering faith and courage he would need to confront Pharaoh and lead his people to freedom.
It's like the wilderness became his classroom, right?
Check that.
And the lessons weren't just about herding sheep, but about herding people, about patience, perseverance, and trusting in something bigger than himself.
Exactly. It speaks to the idea that even in the mundane or seemingly insignificant moments of our lives, there can be profound lessons being learned, skills being honed, and a deeper purpose being revealed.
Okay, so we've got protection and preparation.
Mm-hmm.
Now, reason number 3 is empowerment.
Okay.
The idea that facing challenges in isolation can force you to tap into strength and abilities that you didn't even know you had.
Yeah.
It's like pushing yourself beyond your limits
Uh-huh.
and discovering a whole new level of resilience and self-reliance.
This reminds me of the concept of anti-fragility.
Oh, okay.
The idea that some things actually become stronger when exposed to stress and disorder. Isolation in this context could be seen as a form of stress that forces us to adapt, innovate, and draw upon hidden reserves of strength and creativity.
And they use David, again, as an example here.
Okay.
But this time it's about how he led a band of outcasts and formed a loyal army. He basically took those who were rejected and marginalized by society and turned them into a powerful force.
It's a beautiful illustration of the power of finding strength in unconventional places.
Yeah.
David, by leading those who were considered outsiders, likely gained a different perspective on leadership,
Huh.
one that valued empathy, loyalty, and recognizing potential in those often overlooked.
Right.
It's like he built a community of strength and resilience precisely because they had all faced isolation and rejection.
So it's not just about becoming stronger yourself, but about empowering others who've been through similar challenges.
Right.
It's like forging a collective strength that wouldn't have been possible without that shared experience of isolation.
And this leads us to a really interesting question.
Okay.
Is all isolation divinely ordained, or can it also be a consequence of societal structures, prejudice, or even personal choices that lead to alienation and disconnection?
Yeah.
It's a complex issue that deserves deeper exploration.
That is a fascinating question, and it makes you realize that there are multiple layers to this whole concept of isolation.
Right.
But even if some isolation isn't directly from God, it seems like there are still lessons to be learned and growth to be gained from those experiences.
Yeah, absolutely. And perhaps that's part of the challenge.
Okay.
To discern the reasons behind our isolation, to learn from it regardless of its source, and to find ways to connect with others who might be experiencing similar feelings of loneliness or disconnection.
Okay, so we've covered 3 reasons so far: protection, preparation, and empowerment.
Okay.
And I'm already sensing a theme here.
Yeah.
Like, isolation is this crucible where you're being tested, refined, and ultimately transformed for something greater.
Yeah.
But there are 4 more reasons to go,
Okay.
and they get even deeper into the spiritual and personal implications of this whole experience.
Right.
Ready to keep diving?
Absolutely. I'm particularly intrigued by the next reason,
Okay.
which delves into the idea of refinement. It suggests that isolation can be a process of purification, of stripping away everything that's not essential to our true selves and our purpose. It's a powerful concept, and I'm eager to explore it further.
Me too. Let's jump right in.
This idea of refinement, it's like taking a piece of raw material and carefully shaping it into something beautiful and valuable.
Yeah.
The source material uses some pretty intense imagery, talking about how God uses isolation to burn away anything in us that doesn't align with his purpose.
Yeah, it definitely paints a vivid picture. It's like that process of smelting metal.
Right.
You have to heat it to extreme temperatures to get rid of the impurities and leave behind pure gold.
Right.
Do you think that metaphor applies here?
Absolutely. It's about stripping away the non-essential, the things that are holding us back from our full potential. And that process can be painful, even agonizing at times. Think about the challenges and setbacks we face in isolation. Loneliness, the doubts, the temptations.
Yeah.
These can feel like that intense heat pushing us to our breaking point.
Right.
But if we can endure it, if we can surrender to the process, we might emerge stronger, more resilient, and more aligned with our true purpose.
So it's not just about removing negative things. It's about forging something new and valuable out of the raw material of our experiences, even the difficult ones.
Exactly. And the message uses the prophet Elijah as an example here.
Okay.
Remember how after his incredible victory over the prophets of Baal, he kind of hits a wall emotionally and flees into the wilderness.
Yeah.
He's exhausted, disillusioned, and feeling completely alone.
It's like he goes from this spiritual high to a crushing low.
Yeah.
And it's in that low point, that moment of isolation, that he has a profound encounter with God.
Yes.
But not in a dramatic, earth-shattering way.
Right.
It's described as a gentle whisper.
Hmm.
What do you make of that?
It's such a powerful image, isn't it?
Yeah.
It suggests that sometimes the most profound revelations, the deepest transformations occur not in the midst of grand events, but in the quiet stillness of solitude. When we're stripped of all distractions, when we're forced to confront our own inner emptiness, that's when we're most receptive to a different kind of wisdom, a gentler guidance that might have been drowned out by the noise of the world.
So it's like isolation creates this space for a deeper level of listening, a more intimate connection with the divine.
Precisely. And that leads us to the next reason, which is all about intimacy.
Oh, okay.
The message argues that God uses isolation to draw us closer to Him, to cultivate a deeper, more personal relationship that wouldn't be possible if we were constantly surrounded by people and distractions.
This one really resonates with me.
Yeah.
Like when you're in a crowded room, it's hard to hear anything clearly.
Right?
But when you step away from all that noise, you can finally hear your own thoughts.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe even a quieter, more subtle voice guiding you.
That's a beautiful way to put it. And they use the example of Jesus' 40 days in the wilderness being tempted by the devil.
Right.
It's the ultimate test of faith, a battle against inner demons and external forces, all happening in this stark, isolated environment.
It's interesting how those 40 days seem to mirror Moses' 40 years.
Yes.
Both involve this intense period of isolation in the wilderness, a kind of spiritual boot camp where they're being prepared for their purpose.
Absolutely. And I think it speaks to the universality of this experience.
Right.
Whether you're a prophet, a leader, or just an ordinary person trying to navigate life's challenges,
Right.
there are going to be moments when you're pushed into the wilderness, metaphorically or literally, and forced to confront your deepest fears and desires.
And it's in those moments when we're stripped bare that we have to rely on something greater than ourselves.
Yes.
We have to dig deep and find that inner strength, that connection to the divine that will sustain us through the darkness.
It's almost like isolation becomes a crucible for faith, a place where it's either refined and strengthened or it crumbles under pressure.
Okay, 2 more reasons to go.
Okay.
Reason number 6 is revelation.
Right.
The idea that God uses isolation to reveal
Mm-hmm.
his plans and purposes to us.
It's like He needs our undivided attention to download the blueprint for our lives, so to speak.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on this one?
This concept resonates deeply with me, especially considering the example they use. The Apostle Paul.
Okay.
After his dramatic conversion experience on the road to Damascus,
Yeah.
he doesn't immediately rush off to preach the gospel.
Right.
Instead, he spends 3 years in the Arabian desert.
It's almost counterintuitive, isn't it?
It is.
You'd think he'd be bursting with newfound zeal, eager to share his experience with the world.
Right.
Like he gets this life-altering download of information, but he needs time to process it, to integrate it into his being before he can authentically share it with others.
Yeah.
Do you think that's what those 3 years in the desert were about?
I think that's a brilliant insight.
Yeah.
It's not enough to simply receive information.
Uh-huh.
Even divine revelation.
Right.
We need to wrestle with it, to understand its implications, to see how it fits into the larger tapestry of our lives and beliefs.
Yeah. And that kind of deep processing often requires solitude.
Right.
A space where we can step away from the demands and expectations of the world and truly listen to our inner voice, to the guidance we're receiving.
It makes you wonder what kind of internal battles Paul might have fought during that time.
Right.
He was a devout Jew,
Mm-hmm.
a Pharisee.
Yes.
And suddenly he's embracing this radical new understanding of God and salvation through Jesus.
Wow. Yeah.
That's a massive paradigm shift. It's like his whole world got turned upside down.
Absolutely. And I think that's where the transformative power of isolation comes in. It's not just about receiving information. It's about allowing that information to reshape us, to challenge our assumptions, and to ultimately lead us to a deeper understanding of ourselves and our place in the universe.
Okay, and finally we come to reason number 7, elevation.
Okay.
This is where things get really interesting.
Okay.
The message argues that God often isolates people before he elevates them,
Yeah.
that he hides them so they can grow and develop. And then, when the time is right, he reveals them to the world in a powerful way.
It's such a dramatic concept, and it's woven throughout history and mythology.
Yeah.
The hero's journey often involves a period of obscurity,
Right.
of being underestimated or overlooked,
Yeah.
before they rise to meet their destiny.
Yeah.
And the story of Joseph, which the message highlights, is a perfect example of this.
He goes from being betrayed by his brothers and sold into slavery to becoming a powerful leader in Egypt, saving the nation from famine.
Mhm.
Talk about a roller coaster ride.
And it's all made possible by those years of isolation, first as a slave, then as a prisoner,
Yeah.
wrongly accused and forgotten.
Yeah.
But those experiences, as painful as they were,
Yeah.
shaped his character, honed his leadership skills,
Yeah.
and ultimately prepared him for the moment when he would step onto the world stage and fulfill his destiny. It's like the isolation was a necessary part of his becoming.
Okay, so we've covered all 7 reasons now.
Yeah.
Protection, preparation, empowerment, refinement, intimacy, revelation, and elevation.
Yeah.
That's a lot to unpack.
It is.
And it's given us a whole new perspective on isolation, hasn't it?
Yeah, it has.
It's not just about being alone. It's about what happens within us during that time.
It's about transformation, about becoming the person we're meant to be. And those biblical examples, they bring these concepts to life, don't they? They show us that even in the midst of suffering, even when we feel lost and alone, there can be a deeper purpose, unfolding a divine plan, working itself out in ways we can't always see.
They're like roadmaps for navigating those difficult seasons, showing us that there's hope, there's meaning, and there's always a possibility of emerging stronger and more aligned with our purpose on the other side.
Absolutely.
But let's take a closer look at those biblical figures themselves.
Okay.
Their stories aren't just abstract concepts. They're filled with human drama, emotions, and struggles that I think we can all relate to.
I agree. I think exploring those stories in more detail will give us a deeper appreciation for the complexities of this journey and offer us even more insights into how we can navigate our own periods of isolation.
Let's do it. We'll be right back after a quick. So we've been exploring this whole idea that isolation can be a time of preparation and transformation.
Right.
And we've touched on some pretty amazing biblical figures who went through these intense periods of solitude.
Yeah.
But their stories are so much more than just examples, right?
Absolutely.
They're filled with human drama, emotion, and real struggles.
Exactly. It's easy to look at these figures from a distance and see them as larger-than-life heroes.
Yeah.
But when you dig into their stories,
Yeah.
you realize they were just as human as we are, facing doubts, fears, and temptations.
Take Moses, for example. 40 years tending sheep.
Ah,
That's a long time to be away from everything you know.
it is.
Do you think there were moments when he doubted God's plan?
Oh, yeah.
When he wondered if he was ever going to do anything significant with his life?
It's almost impossible to imagine that he didn't have those moments.
Yeah.
Think about it. He was raised in Pharaoh's court,
Right.
then flees into exile after killing an Egyptian. He's living as a shepherd, essentially, starting over in middle age.
Right.
That's a recipe for some serious soul-searching.
It makes you wonder what kind of inner work he was doing during those 40 years.
Yeah.
Was he consciously preparing for leadership, or was it more about simply surviving and finding his way back to a sense of purpose?
It's probably a combination of both.
Yeah.
On the one hand, he's learning practical skills,
Right.
shepherding, navigating the wilderness, surviving in harsh conditions.
Uh-huh.
But on a deeper level, he's likely grappling with his past, his identity,
Yeah.
and his understanding of God's will.
Right.
That time in isolation could have been a crucible for his faith, a period of stripping away old beliefs and forging a new understanding of his relationship with the divine.
It's like the wilderness became his teacher,
Yeah.
shaping him into the leader he needed to be, even if he wasn't fully aware of it at the time.
Right.
And then there's David. Talk about an underdog story. He goes from shepherd to giant slayer to king. But not without facing years of isolation, running from Saul, leading a band of outcasts.
Right.
What a crash course in leadership.
David's story is all about resilience and adaptability.
Yeah.
He's constantly facing challenges, forced to think on his feet, make tough decisions, and rally others to his cause.
Yeah.
His time in isolation wasn't just about physical survival, it was about developing the mental and emotional fortitude he needed to lead a nation.
It's like every challenge, every betrayal, every moment of uncertainty was shaping him into the king he was destined to be.
And it's important to remember that even as he's facing these external threats,
Yeah.
he's also wrestling with inner turmoil.
Right.
He's betrayed by Saul, the king he once served faithfully.
Right.
He's leading a group of outcasts who are often desperate and unruly.
Yeah.
He's constantly on the move, never quite sure who to trust. That kind of isolation can take a toll on your spirit.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And yet through it all, he maintains his faith, his courage, and his sense of purpose. It's like he never loses sight of the bigger picture, even when he's surrounded by darkness.
Which brings us to Elijah.
Right.
Now, this is a guy who experienced some serious highs and lows.
It did.
One minute he's calling down fire from heaven. The next he's fleeing for his life and feeling completely defeated.
It's like he goes from superhero to zero in the blink of an eye.
Right.
And it's in that moment of despair, that feeling of utter isolation, that he has his encounter with God in the cave.
But remember, it wasn't a grand display of power or a booming voice from the heavens.
Right.
It was a gentle whisper, a still small voice.
Hmm.
What do you think that tells us about the nature of divine revelation?
It makes me think that sometimes the most profound messages, the ones that truly transform us, come not in moments of spectacle, but in the quiet spaces of solitude, when we're stripped of all distractions and forced to listen with our whole being.
And that's what Elijah needed in that moment.
Yeah.
He'd just experienced this incredible victory, this public display of God's power. But then he's faced with the reality of human fear and hatred.
Right.
He's threatened, he's running for his life, and he feels utterly alone.
Yeah.
He needs to reconnect with that inner source of strength, to hear that quiet reassurance that he's not alone, that his purpose is still valid.
And that's what isolation can provide, right?
Exactly.
Strips away everything else
Yeah.
and forces us to confront our deepest fears, our doubts,
Yeah.
and ultimately to find that unshakable connection to something greater than ourselves.
Exactly. And then, of course, we have the ultimate example of isolation and transformation. Jesus' 40 days in the wilderness.
Right.
It's a story that's resonated with people for centuries, and it speaks to that universal experience of facing temptation, doubt, and the struggle to align ourselves with our true purpose.
It's interesting how Jesus, even though he's fully God, chooses to enter into that human experience of isolation and testing.
Right.
What do you think that tells us about the nature of faith and spiritual growth?
It shows us that the path to wholeness, to becoming who we're meant to be, often involves facing our shadow side, those parts of ourselves that we'd rather keep hidden.
Yeah.
And that's something we can only do in solitude when we're honest with ourselves about our weaknesses, our desires, and our fears.
It's like that time in the wilderness becomes a mirror,
Yeah.
reflecting back to us who we truly are, both the light and the darkness.
Yes.
And it's in that space of radical self-acceptance that transformation can begin.
Mm.
And then we have Paul, who, after his dramatic conversion experience, spends 3 years in the Arabian desert before launching into his ministry. It seems counterintuitive.
It is.
He's just had this life-altering revelation.
Yeah.
Wouldn't he want to share it with the world right away?
It's a great example of how sometimes the most important work happens behind the scenes in those hidden seasons of preparation and integration.
Yeah.
Paul needed that time in the desert to process everything that happened, to wrestle with his old beliefs,
Right.
and to allow this new understanding of God's grace to take root in his heart.
It's like he's given this incredible gift, this new truth that's going to change the world. But he needs time to unpack it, to understand its implications, and to figure out how to best share it with others.
And it's in that solitude, away from the distractions and expectations of others, that he's able to connect with the source of his inspiration, to receive guidance, and to craft his message in a way that will resonate with those he's called to serve.
So it's not just about having the information, it's about embodying it,
Right.
living it out, and becoming a vessel for that message to flow through. And finally, we have Joseph.
Yeah,
His story is like the ultimate comeback story.
it is.
Betrayal, hardship, imprisonment, and then finally elevation to a position of power and influence.
Joseph's journey is all about trusting in divine timing.
Yeah.
He's mistreated, unjustly accused, and seemingly forgotten.
Yeah.
But through it all, he maintains his integrity, his faith, and his belief that God has a plan for his life.
And when the time is right, that plan unfolds in a way he could never have imagined. He's elevated to a position of authority in Egypt where he's able to save countless lives during the famine. It's like his entire journey, all the pain and suffering was preparing him for that moment.
And it speaks to that idea that sometimes the very things we perceive as setbacks or obstacles are actually stepping stones on our path to greatness.
Wow.
It's about trusting the process even when we don't understand it, and believing that even in the darkest of times, there's a higher purpose unfolding.
So we've got these incredible biblical examples, each illustrating how isolation can be a crucible for transformation and growth.
Right.
But how does this all connect to our own lives? Most of us aren't going to be leading nations out of slavery or facing down giants, so what can we learn from these stories?
I think the key takeaway is that while our experiences may be different, the underlying principles remain the same.
Okay.
We all face moments of isolation, whether it's physical, emotional, or spiritual.
Yeah.
The question is, how do we choose to respond to those moments? Do we allow them to break us? Or do we use them as opportunities to dig deeper, to connect with something greater than ourselves?
Yeah.
And to emerge stronger and more resilient on the other side?
It's like we're all on a hero's journey in a sense.
We are.
We all face challenges, we all have moments of doubt and uncertainty, and we all have the potential to overcome those obstacles and achieve something extraordinary.
Exactly. And those biblical stories, they provide a framework for understanding that journey, for recognizing the patterns, and for trusting that even in the midst of isolation, there's a divine hand guiding us, shaping us, and preparing us for something greater than we can imagine.
So to wrap up this deep dive,
Okay.
we've explored the idea that isolation, while often challenging and even painful,
Right.
can be a powerful catalyst for growth, transformation, and ultimately elevation to our true purpose.
Absolutely.
We've looked at the biblical examples of Moses, David, Elijah, Jesus, Paul, and Joseph,
Yeah.
each demonstrating how those periods of solitude shaped them into the leaders, prophets, and world changers they were meant to be.
And we've seen that while their stories are unique, they all share common threads.
Yeah.
Themes of resilience, faith, surrender, and trusting in a divine plan that's unfolding even when we can't see it.
And ultimately, that's the message we want to leave you with today.
Okay.
If you're going through a season of isolation, whether it's by choice or circumstance, embrace it. Use it as a time to go inward, to connect with your true self, to listen for that still small voice, and to trust that something beautiful and meaningful is being birthed within you.
And remember, you're not alone on this journey. Countless others have walked this path before you, and their stories offer hope, guidance, and inspiration. Keep seeking, keep growing, and keep trusting in the process, even when it feels difficult.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We hope this conversation has given you some new insights into the power and purpose of isolation. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.